Hello and welcome to an episode of The Money Movement. I'm really excited to be here in Singapore, here for the Singapore Fintech Festival and spending time with amazing people, and very excited for this episode to have a repeat guest, Balaji, someone who I've had a chance to get to know for many years. Welcome back to The Money Movement.
Well, great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So there's always like so much we can talk about, which makes it really fun. I think one place to start might just be, given the kind of arc of where we are in the development of crypto, there's a lot of discussion about kind of what's it going to take for this to kind of go from kind of where it is today, which is still like in the kind of Jeffrey Moore context, an early adopter kind of environment, right? Maybe there's a couple 100 million people or whatever it is, to 1 billion or 2 billion people. And I sort of think about that through a lot of different lenses, and I think we can kind of pull a few threads on that topic in the conversation. But as a technologist, both of us being technologists, what do you think the kind of hardest technologies are right now, and the problems that are being solved that are going to solve for kind of scale adoption?
Good question. Crypto is, first of all, it is useful to, I'm glad you said hundreds of millions of people, because in a sense it's early, but in a sense we've also made real progress, right?
Huge, yeah.
Huge. So from where, the white paper came out and Bitcoin launched, in 2009 to here, if you had said, okay, you're going to be a global phenomenon with hundreds of millions of users in about 10 years, with nation-state recognition by multiple countries, and so on and so forth.
Some of the biggest financial institutions,
yes,
mainstream, Main Street, et cetera. Yeah,
that's right. And multiple unicorns and blah blah, all the giant ecosystem that is being built. You kind of need to book that as a win overall.
Totally.
Net, right?
It's like wow.
That's wow. And like the analogies are sometimes overdone, but that I think it's roughly comparable to the early 2000s.
Yep,
of the
that's exactly where I think we are.
Yeah. So you've got so we're past that initial dot-com bubble kind of phase, right? We have a kind of the early infrastructure players, similar to the exchanges are sort of a combination of the portals and the and the AOL types, like the kind of actually getting you online, like I was going to say fiber, but let's say
DSL.
Exactly, DSL, exactly, right? So DSL providers, early, providers at that time, and now what we need is kind of the ecosystem to mature and the tooling to mature. People forget, how long it took for the internet to actually mature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like back in early 2000s, like writing software for the web was
not that easy.
Really not great. Building a rich application, actually delivering any media of value, really couldn't do it.
That's right.
Postage stamp, blah blah blah.
That's
that kind of thing. Yeah.
It was like 2004 before Ajax. And Gmail and Google Maps were extremely difficult things to do in the browser. And HTML was actually built off of like a book programming environment where, to do 2D, let alone 3D layouts like VR with something that's initially built for laying out books, it was actually not.
Remember,
really
you
true.
can help blame me for Flash, and we tried to solve it with a different client. Which it's actually quite good.
There's a Brightcove stuff. Yeah.
Well, no, so Macromedia.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, and Flash had its heyday, but then with iPad or whatever,
it was a closed system.
Yeah, but it was fine for a while. It was just something where that was the best we could do during the 2000s. Yeah. It's all IE, and the thing is that people forget. I spoke to very senior exec in Microsoft, and they were saying something which is interesting, which is for them the internet was basically nothing other than Google as late as 2009. From their perspective, Google was the only significant internet business as late as 2009, which is really not that long ago.
Yeah.
Right? And then what happened was after 2009, you had the iPhone and Google and Google ad revenue and Facebook revenue all went vertical, and Facebook adoption all went vertical.
E-commerce scaled much more.
Everything. That's right. And all this ad spend shifted from, because of the financial crisis, had to go into efficiency. And the internet was finally there to kind of capture that reign. So sort of a social catalyst as well as a technological catalyst for adoption, right? And so I think a bunch of things, and then actually even Stripe was only around then. Uber was only found around then. Airbnb was found around. A lot of things we think of as the modern internet environment is basically about 10 years old, right? So
you needed a lot of it. You needed mobile broadband. You needed these very high quality client user experience environments. You needed that kind of wide distribution of those things, before you could kind of turn on super high utility value for a lot of things.
That's right. And the experience we have today where there's an app for everything and so on is really mid 2010s.
Right.
And really I'd say maybe 2020 you could say was the first year that you had the digital flippening, and now it was kind of digital first, right? So so using that kind of build out, the reason being because on an exponential, people tend to forget how long that took.
It's a long curve, and then it feels like it's extremely fast.
Exactly. So here's my mental model on this, which is if you put like time on this axis, in the 1990s, only academics and so on were spending any time on the internet. By the 2000s, maybe you and I spent a little bit of time on the internet, maybe you maybe more than I, but I don't know, only a small percentage of the world was spending a few hours a day, right? By the time you get to 2010, a much larger percentage of the world was spending more time. And then by the time you get to 2020 or 2022, we have
you didn't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly. 3 or 4 billion people who are spending multiple hours a day on the internet, and probably 1 billion people who are spending most of their waking lives on the internet. So if you think about those two axes, like just the number of people in the world, and so the percentage or amount of people in the world, and then the percentage of time they're spending, that goes from a little box over here, like less than 0.1%, less than 0.1%, up to something like 50% of the world spending 50% of their time on the internet, right? And I think if you think about that, here's one comparable metric. Just as we put all of our time on the internet, I think we're going to be putting all of our money on chain.
Yeah, and our economic value exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
The ways in which we trade our value, so to speak, as humans, as entities, that will just become mediated by that.
That's right. That's right. And I think the graph would be on the x-axis is the number of people in the world, or the percentage of the world, and the y-axis is the percentage of net worth on chain, right? Yeah. And so in 2009, perhaps only Satoshi had, actually even Satoshi didn't, because Bitcoin is worth less than $1 or whatever, didn't have a value. Let's say 0% of the world had 0% of their assets on chain. 5 years later, less than 0.1% of the world had some percent of their assets on chain. 10, 15 years later, by 2022, I don't know, it might be, so of the 300 million people, that's about 5% of the world, right? Maybe 1% of the world has 10% of their assets on chain, or whatever the number is, 5%, I don't know the exact number, right? And so that's a little bit more of like a rectangle than a square. It's like a small demographic that has a large fraction of their assets on chain, and then it kind of drops off like this. And I think as we go 3 years, 5 years, et cetera out, I don't know, it's a very ballpark.
Long tail.
Long tail, that's right. And by, I don't know, 2030, but certainly by 2040, I would expect it similar to where we are now, where 50% of the world has 50% of their assets on chain, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly right. It's one of the things that was attractive about getting into this space, like now 10 years ago, was that you could sort of see the way in which like the web played out, and the kind of the arc of that kind of adoption curve and what it meant, and all of that, and you could kind of see the exact same thing happening in value exchange. And what was interesting to me was like, okay, that's like a 10, 20, 30-year thing, and that's actually kind of exciting to like be involved in
something that's got that long arc.
That's got that kind of long arc, and realizing that you probably hit milestones like you were just saying, like we're at like nation state awareness and adoption is like the trickle of that, like to say, wow, this is gonna be something that basically is going to force kind of reconstitution of even political and economic systems at a very fundamental level. It's like, well, I want to work on that. Like, that's like really worth working on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to come back to your question, which is, so if this is like, just like today we're at about 50% of the world spending on the order of 10 to 50% of their time online, how do we get to 50% of the world spending on the order of 10 to 50% of their time on chain? What are the specific things, right? Okay. So first is, with USDC, which I think we did quite a lot of stuff.
Just a reminder for the world, Balaji was a huge part of the launch of USDC, collaborated super closely with Circle and when he was CTO at Coinbase, and I'm super grateful for that collaboration and where it is today. It's pretty amazing. I have Brian Armstrong on the show later today.
Great.
We're both super excited about where USDC is.
It's been an amazing collaboration, and it's really great to see it. I mean, I don't know what the exact ratio is, but it's 1,000x or 10,000x larger than it was then. I don't know the exact ratio, but it's on that order, right?
Very much.
So the thing about that is, here's how I think about it. We now have, so first we have Bitcoin, and you have a single point-to-point payment on chain, right? Then you have Ethereum, and now you can do not just a single A to B payment, you can do A pays B, and then B gives it back A tokens.
Programmable money.
Exactly. Or A
programmable value.
Programmable value, right? Or you have A pays B, and then B pays A back in a loan over time.
Yep.
So you start to have more complicated payments. And then we have stable coins. Okay, so what comes after that? So you have payments, you have basic contracts, you have payment structures. So now one direction you can take this is you start going to thinking of full entities on chain, right? Like Aragon and other things, and the Wyoming DAO law, right? So you can form a company just like you can set up, you can do instantiate new, like just like in JavaScript, create a new object, right? Okay, so you form a company on chain, and now that company has financial statements on chain, right? Yeah. So because
perfectly auditable,
exactly,
transparent. Real time.
Exactly, that's right. And so now you can get
inherently global.
Inherently global, that's right. And potentially denominated in USDC if you want to do like US dollar based, right? And so now
every org will have like a kind of treasury management strategy, and like people generally entities are like kind of conservative over here, and they're not their mandate's not like go speculate on all this, but they might need derivatives because they're interacting across different tokens and other things to hedge risk, and so they're going to have whatever they have.
That's right.
Strategy,
and all the stuff, the various differences between GAAP and IFRS accounting and so on. You can actually, like the LIFO and FIFO stuff, you can put those into rules where you slurp up the on-chain stream of raw payments data, effectively your general ledger with some annotations, and you turn that into cash flow and income statement and balance sheet, and you have real-time financial statements. And first of all, that's really awesome. Now, what does that facilitate? That means you've got a transparent investor environment on chain, right?
Totally.
And then over time, those companies and those financial statements, now you can go one more level and you can have companies doing an M&A and you can do investments, right? That's how you get the global crypto economy. And I think, so that's one vision for how, today we think of like the US as the single largest integrated market and China as the second largest. But I think this is a vision for
the internet.
The internet, exactly, that's right. And that brings in India and Brazil and the Middle East with the Midwest, right? Like it bridges essentially the free world as the free internet, where now people can not just we take for granted that somebody in Brazil can collaborate with somebody in India and in
the world of information and communications, we've kind of accepted there's no such thing as a border.
That's right.
I mean, basically, right? Other than some extreme kind of scenarios, right?
That's right.
And we haven't yet accepted the fact that there's basically no such thing as a border in economic activity. But like people into crypto have accepted that.
That's right.
Basically, it's just the rest of the world's catching up.
That's right. And so I think what that means is if we think about the cryptocurrency, fiat currency exchange, and how wildly important, lucrative, difficult that was, perhaps disproportionate to most people's expectations, even in the early 2000s. Like, to some extent, Satoshi, to my knowledge at least, didn't write about the exchange rate or things like that. And people thought you could bootstrap like a pure crypto economy. It turns out that even if, from a historian's lens, right, you might look at the rise of Bitcoin as almost a step function. Like it was like flat and then went totally vertical. In practice, as we know, it was a continuous thing. It was exactly. It was
up and to the right.
That's right, and with a lot of ups and downs in the middle, right? So it didn't look like this straight ascent. And
except for the people with the log charts.
Except the log charts. That's right. So and I still have faith in that log chart. So let's see, log chart, okay? But so by kind of reference to that, the bridge between the crypto world and the fiat world is the kind of thing that a pragmatist knows is important, but somebody who's totally centralized or totally decentralized wouldn't think is important, right? Okay, so by analogy to that, if the cryptocurrency fiat currency exchange bridge was so important, I think the crypto identity fiat identity bridge, so digital passports after digital currency, right?
Totally.
I think crypto company, fiat company, sort of like the Wyoming DAO law, where you're taking the off-chain,
I have this like philosophy. I mean, like as you know, like Circle. We've always sort of had this kind of view of like we're building like these hybrid models, right?
Yes.
And so USDC itself is a hybrid model.
Exactly.
And so identity, you're going to need hybrid models, and then like real world entity or a legal entity and an on-chain entity, hybrid models. Like, and so there's a period of time, I mean, where it's going to be like innovative companies, innovative jurisdictions, innovative, other things that are going to allow those kind of hybrid models to exist.
That's right.
And then eventually it kind of all blurs, kind of like the tipping point in living digital in 2022 versus, where you were in 2010.
That's right. And actually, USDC is one of those hybrid models where you've got the fiat dollar and the crypto dollar, and there's that interface. And I remember when like stablecoins first came out, people were like, okay, I could send dollars, but on the blockchain. Haha, what's the point of that? Right. And if you recall, in the early 2000s, people were like, oh, great, I can edit a document, but online. Did you hear about Microsoft Word? Yeah. Can we do it offline? And obviously the Windows toolkit was actually better at that time, right?
And
they didn't
skepticism of that.
Inherent skepticism, that's right. And what they didn't get was that putting it online got you all the stuff we now take for granted, like synchronization and a single copy rather than attachments, all that stuff, right? And so putting something on chain, it gets you the stuff we were talking about. It gets you transparency, it gets you a single copy. The accounting statements are right there.
Programmability, interoperability.
Exactly. And it's funny. I remember, it was one thing that you and I are both aware of that maybe the world isn't aware. Like when you have a big four and they're doing audits or something like that, the big four, they will actually use the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains as the gold standard of truth because they have triple entry accounting.
Right.
This is totally different from the model of, oh my God, Bitcoin and Ethereum, that's like, it's scams or whatever. Actually, it's a gold standard of truth, right? So you actually have a gold standard of truth for international accounting in a way that's never been there before, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
No. I mean,
that boosts investor confidence, all this stuff, right?
Yeah. So I want to pull a couple threads because you've touched on things that I wanted to talk about. We'll go deeper on.
Yeah.
So I think I think one is sort of this idea of effectively like on-chain like debt capital markets, and when I think about growth in stablecoins in particular. Right. A lot of people oftentimes will think, well, stablecoins are going to come in and they're going to disrupt payments. And I think that's probably true. And over the long run, right, like kind of payment utility will be commoditized like data transmission was commoditized on the internet. And so you do have that. But that the real breakthrough is sort of what I kind of call time value of money applications where, basically, money in motion and money at rest. And if you have money at rest, which a lot of people do, and that money at rest could be like literally, I have money at rest right now that's in a demand deposit account. And it might be a healthy amount of money, but like the banking system has a way of kind of leveraging that and then kind of doing money multiplication through lending. But if you have a full reserve asset like a dollar, a digital dollar in the form of like a stable coin, and you have kind of money at rest, can you actually build credit intermediation models that are entirely sourced on chain, that are entirely delivered on chain, where the effectively like the entity, the underwriting, the data, the actual value itself all sort of happens there, and could that lead to kind of long tail debt capital markets that can actually service entities, households, and firms is way better than the kind of traditional banking model.
This is actually a really interesting question in terms of, I am not sure if the money multiplier would hold up in an on-chain environment where you can actually see the money being created. That is to say, but
there's no money creation.
Okay, fine. But basically, like the typical understanding of the money multiplier is that you've got a fractional reserve and you can lend out essentially, quote, more than you have. Yeah. They say people's 101 mental model is I give money to the bank and the bank can lend it out, right? Yeah. The 102 is actually the bank can, quote, create money by lending out money that it doesn't have, but based on this kind of money multiplier, the reserve model, right? The 103 model is, well, that's bad, and actually what you want is full reserve, and they shouldn't be able to lend out money that they don't have. And the 104 is, well, anything is okay so long as there's some consent and transparency on it, and we see what the market will bear. And it's interesting. It's an interesting question is, I actually, in the environment where you have everything on chain, I don't know if you'll be able to have a very low reserve ratio because someone will try to arb that. Yeah. Right now, it's the fact that people can't actually see it. Yeah. The flows of funds may actually be the reason that people can do because when you don't see all the other loans the bank is doing. They're not on chain, right? The transparency of that. It's to give a small analogy. It's kind of like with Google News, it showed the same headline being printed in 100 different newspapers. That just wasn't transparent unless you were buying the Miami Herald and New York Newsday and so on all at the same time and holding them up, which no one was doing until Google News started doing that, right? So I feel like, I don't know, I think the transparency is good in many ways, but it may constrain what people are willing to pay in that environment.
So
Or willing to accept in terms of, like loans and stuff. Go ahead.
So I think my thought is a little different, which is essentially that, this gets into privacy and identity and other things too, which are all like necessary components of this. But I think that the premise that I have is that you don't actually have money multiplication in the form of money creation. So
you will not, or you do not. You currently do not.
You will not.
Okay.
Right. And with stablecoins today, you do not.
Correct.
By definition.
That's right, because it's a one for one.
There are some like things that try to do that, but like those.
Yeah. USDC doesn't have that because it's a one for one. Fiat dollar to crypto dollar.
Yeah.
Nothing.
You essentially have U.S. Treasuries and sort of soon like cash at the Fed. Right?
That's right.
So it's just like it's a straight government debt obligation kind of dollar, right? But then let's say someone has a working capital need, and so your typical model, like the bank creates money and says, hey, I've got this much here in a form of demand deposits, and I'm kind of comfortable with the risk profile of liquidity needs, and so I'm going to create these additional deposits, basically. This model is a little different. It would effectively say users would elect to time lock value, and so instead of there being actual money creation, there's just time locked money, and you could do it programmatically, right? You could have that all be kind of very much handled kind of programmatically, and users could, just like you have like flash loans as an example of this today, where someone's kind of created a pattern on chain where basically it's like capital utilization for seconds or minutes or whatever is actually an early indicator of a model of kind of lending,
new capital markets,
new capital markets that can exist there. And so if entities, let's just say I'm a corporation or I'm a startup or I want to like build a new solar plant or whatever it is, if they could tap capital markets, and it would be helpful if more and more of their own treasury operations, et cetera, was on chain, so that you could have automated underwriting and you could have risk scoring, you could have other things, but where it is essentially like classic savings investment as opposed to kind of money creation by banks, right? And the premise is that, like, I think if you did that, you could end up with a world where you have a safer foundation, like at the core. But where you actually have just dramatically more efficient and accessible markets for capital.
So it's interesting. So I have thought about this, and I do think, here's one thesis on the world, which is, I don't quite call it at variance, but just kind of maybe stressing different aspects, right? Which is, I think overall, what we may see, let's call this a scenario. Let me put it as a scenario, right? We may see is a world which is much more shifted to equity versus debt in terms. So the difference, like primary and secondary investment, right? And of course also debt versus equity. It's much more shifted towards equity, and maybe even much more shifted towards primary investment for equity rather than secondary sales of equity, where the money is going directly into the company to go buy profitable, machinery or goods or whatever, versus secondary sales, right? And the thinking is, why would we see that? Well, if in the on-chain environment you can see everybody's reserves, because you got proof of solvency all the way down. And we know that people prize, for example, the fact that USDC has like a 1-to-1 ratio and things like that, right? Then people will kind of want the audit to show, okay, there's maybe zero fractional reserve stuff happening. And instead, what it is if I'm taking out a loan, it's actually a power user tool. That is to say, in general, for example, with companies, we typically advise them, take venture capital maybe, but be very cautious about venture debt because, unless you have very steady cash flow streams, you can get wiped out, right? Venture debt can kill you because they want a stream of cash today, whereas, with venture capital, they're willing to tolerate the uncertainty as to when you make money, right? So debt is still necessary because you need to know whether something's at a 3% or 4% rate or what have you. You need to compare various investments against there. But I do believe that most people are probably in more debt overall societally than we need to be, and we're probably doing less equity than we need, right? Because equity you can kind of build value,
with
right?
tokenization of cap tables or of whatever org form you have, DAOs is like the purest form or whatever, like a token-based entity.
That's right.
That gives you a pure form to underwrite and so on. But like the hybrid scenario also could work.
Hybrid scenario also works. That's right. And so that is the direction which I consider scary. I think it's perhaps more beneficial, where people can tokenize themselves, for example, and they can sell, quote, a piece of their own equity. This is like the Hernando de Soto model, where people, who were in countries that don't have great property rights suddenly have great property rights, because we can teleport rule of law as a service anywhere, right? So that's like, now you can represent that thing on chain. And of course, you're going to need some enforcer of that offline.
That whole problem.
That non-trivial problem. However, I do think that for a fair number of things, smart locks will get you there, right? So ENS, there's a demo on this, but you can open smart locks with, for doors or cars or things, and that can be gated on chain, and that's relatively difficult to hotwire offline. So that gets you houses, that gets you cars.
A lot of property.
A lot of property, right? So now you can actually think of crypto extending.
That is really cool. I had not thought about that.
Okay.
So very cool.
Very important piece of the puzzle, right? Because that doesn't get you everything, but it gets you, it pushes it one step further, right? And then with potentially augmented reality, depending on how well those glasses work, Apple is talking about this, Meta is talking about this. Those could also be lenses or filters that disappear or appear because they're gated on chain, right? So various kinds of information might only be accessible as overlays, if you have the keys on them, right? So I think we might need some creativity. But I think smart locks get you a big unlock of a lot of things. And in theory, you might be able to smash the glass and still live in a house or something like that. But in practice, you're not going to be able to easily start a Tesla that is being Ethereum locked, because that's like some solid state electronics. Where are you going to find that in the car? How are you going to boost that, right? So, all right. So that means that you have new forms of equity, right? From personal tokens to other things. You have also deeper capital markets, because you've got this international pool, right?
And those capital markets can be equity-like and debt-like, and people can mix and match as appropriate to the nature of kind of where they are in their life cycle.
Exactly. And just like now we think of information as like a stream of bytes that's on tap. The internet is there. You can just stream bytes locally to your computer. The money will flow under some terms from some provider as this incredibly powerful abstraction of millions of people, right? Part of this is this concept I call the DeFi matrix. Did we talk about that before?
No, okay. It sounds cool.
It's cool. Okay, so the DeFi matrix, I think of as to this decade, perhaps in part what the social graph was to the last one.
Right.
And the idea is that we don't, right now we had, so we used to have just Forex, right? Like USD versus JPY and so on, right? That matrix of, right? Then we added in cryptocurrencies. And then you can actually, though, think of this giant table of every asset versus every asset. So fiat currencies, cryptocurrencies, stocks, bonds, et cetera, NFTs, ENS, et cetera. Gigantic table like this. And everything with automated market makers gets a quote from everything else in real time, right? And that market may be very thin, but some algorithm will take it from you at some price. And so what that means, actually, which is interesting, is potentially it reduces the need for cash. Why? Because it's a separate kind of way of thinking about it, but if any asset you have,
can be, in a sense, it makes barter markets efficient.
That's right.
In a way, because everything at the end can price against everything else.
That's exactly right.
So, you couldn't do that before.
That's right. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, just like with the Google News thing from before, suddenly once Google News indexed every newspaper, for the first time, their geographical advantage was undermined, right? And so now you have the Kansas City Star versus the Miami Herald versus this. And so now basically just reprinting the same Reuters article wouldn't do it. And they all had to compete with each other on unique content, and many of them didn't make it. And the national papers became international papers and so on. And I think similarly, what's going to happen with the DeFi matrix is every fiat currency is put into competition with every other fiat currency, right? And so some of them, like well-managed currencies, like maybe the Swiss franc or the dollar, potentially, or depending on
synthetic stables at some level, right?
I would argue, but we could discuss the dollar's management, but at least the dollar's popularity is still there, right? Maybe synthetics, maybe the Singapore dollar, some currencies with a reputation, either popularity or reputation for sobriety, those will go worldwide, right? The concept of like dollarization, right, in Latin America, right? Okay, great. You're very familiar. Of course, you're familiar. You've been dollarizing the world. That's right. Yeah. So, but for the viewers, dollarization is when like a country, often in Latin America, sometimes Africa, will try to stabilize its currency by pegging it to the dollar, one for one. So it's got this external thing, right?
Or where just the population just decides to do it. Before the government even gets to it. Yeah.
Exactly. So the government's printing too much money, and then they'll say, okay, the dollar is this kind of stable thing from us. Okay. So that concept basically means now countries, for the first time, they don't have a de facto geography lock. They are competing on features. And we're starting to see this, like in Sweden, their central bank digital currency will, they're thinking about adding privacy to it, right? And for others, maybe, okay, their currency, allows you to do contracts in Switzerland or something like that, right? And so that's a new thing where they're not competing.
Seems like they've got to compete more on policy than on technology, in the sense of like I think what's happening with stablecoins from a policy perspective, it varies from place to place. But in some ways, like in the US, where we're going to see a bill that gets passed, it is in effect saying digital dollars, like the innovation around digital dollars should happen in the private sector on the open internet using this kind of new infrastructure layer. And we want to see a lot of people compete in that. And I think it's sort of an acknowledgement that the form factor and the features and other things are going to kind of get driven by, innovators, right?
Yeah. I think that's right.
And so you want a policy environment where people can issue, dollar digital currencies that have unique privacy characteristics or that have, other things. And so, as opposed to the government doing it itself.
That's right. That's right. I think we might end up seeing three spheres, right? Yeah. So there's the Chinese sphere, which is the digital yuan, CBDC, right? There is the U.S. establishment sphere, which is different entities that are making U.S. dollar pegged stablecoins that effectively get de facto new banking licenses. Yeah. The reason is with a stablecoin, you can reinvent many of the features, traditional features of banking. You can basically build like a Wells Fargo or JPMC interface for the most part on top of the stablecoin. And then you might get a third group, which is things that are not dollar pegged, but that are things like FRAX, for example, which are like a global stablecoin or what have you, right? And we'll see how those different kinds of things play out. And those are complementary. There's another part I wanted to talk about, which is with that DeFi matrix, you have something interesting, which is most people don't really actually think about what a CBDC means. And what a CBDC actually means is the central bank now is kind of disintermediating banks, right?
In its purest retail form.
In its purest form. In its purest form, what it means is right now, because most people don't have a good mental model of what CBDC is and why is it different. Don't we actually already have digital banking or whatever, right? And the way I've thought about it is, or tried to explain it is, okay, we understand the, like a physical dollar bill, you can feed it into an ATM and I can also hand it to you and that's valuable. And so it's fully peer-to-peer over here and I can feed it into an ATM and then you can pull it out of an ATM, right? So I can feed it into ATM, send it to you, okay. The thing that we can't do though is after you feed into an ATM and you sort of upload it to the cloud, right? When in its digital form, I can send it from, let's say JPMC to Chase or whatever your bank account is, right? But what you cannot do is you cannot do the equivalent of pulling out from your ATM on your computer, right? You can't download a local.
Unless you use USDC.
Unless you use USDC, exactly. That's right. Yeah. So in USDC, or now you actually have a private key local on your computer. Yeah. So now you have a digital representation that's on your computer, and that is a.
And it's fully reserved instead of fractionally reserved.
That's right. So essentially, you go from a physical currency, and then you've got two branches. You have the national quasi-digital currency, which is JPMC to Chase. And then we have the digital quasi-national currency, which is USDC. And the reason is USDC it's getting more and more like sovereign recognition, but it's not like directly there, whereas JPMC and Chase are like right there. We'll get there, right. And so I think where that merges is the national digital currency, which has the full sovereign recognition of like a JPMC and the full aspect of being able to hold the private keys locally on the computer of a USDC. And it's that aspect of being able to hold the private keys locally on the computer where people don't understand that CBDCs actually mean that you can hold dollars, you can withdraw dollars, you can download dollars to your computer.
Essentially, the conveyance of bearer asset features.
Exactly.
Digital bearer asset features.
Digital bearer asset. The best analogy is just like you can download a PDF to you can download a PDF of a bank statement to your computer, but currently you cannot download the dollars from JPMC to your computer, and that is a new thing.
So I think we'll. I mean, look, what I'm seeing from a policy perspective, if you look at the Payment Stablecoin Act that's working its way through Congress, is I think we'll get there next year. Like where we'll have some version of that, and there'll be competition in that as well. So many more things to talk about and threads pull on. I want to ask one last thing, which is a huge can of worms. So we'll kind of keep it tight, which is a huge barrier to scaling a lot of this is that kind of representation of identity. And so many of these use cases, whether it's an entity that is an individual, an entity that is a firm, or whatever it is, like it's very clear. Like if you have like cryptographic representations of identity that can then be proven and used and exchanged, like that's like a huge improvement. And so that's like right in front of us.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
I think the harder question has been like. It's one of those like chicken and egg issues. Like, what is it going to take? We've got a bunch of stuff we're working on in this, and we're trying to promote standards like Verity and stuff. But like, what do you think the most concrete thing that's possible just in the next couple of years to make real world entities and ultimately governments to some degree as well, like kind of comfortable with on-chain identities that then can allow more and more of these kind of economic interactions to happen? Yeah,
so I'm a big believer in standardization following adoption. Sometimes you can do the standard first and then use that to drive adoption, but usually it's easier to kind of codify what already exists kind of in a bottom-up way, right? There's exceptions, but the way I'm thinking about this is, a sovereign issues two things, right? At least a currency and a passport. And obviously we're used to now currencies that are non-sovereign issued, right? We talk about fiat currencies and digital currencies or cryptocurrencies. And I think this decade will show fiat identities and crypto identities, or fiat passports and crypto passports. And why is that? Well, first is obviously remote is a huge thing now. I mean, it's always been huge, but it took a huge dog leg up, right? And the interaction of crypto and digital nomad and remote and VR and so on will mean that we need to actually think about programmatic identity. More people are going to have more complicated identities than before, right? You're living in location X, you're a citizen of Y, you're talking to a friend in Z, you're doing business.
So the crypto passport layer is going to be the kind of where a lot of the innovation is happening.
Yes, and stuff. That's right. And just like digital currency, it subsumed not just digital gold, but stocks, bonds, digital dollars, all these, anything that you can do debit and credit. I do think that in the fullness of time, the digital passport or crypto passport, that subsumes your Google login and Facebook login, your ENS, your private keys, your API keys, also your key card to your house, right, or your apartment or your office.
Yeah, you're gonna have identity custodians as well, because most people are terrified to like lose their keys.
Exactly. That's right. And you have the keys, the identifier to your smart lock, and so on and so forth. So all of those things that are presentation of credentials, and eventually your passport itself. I mean, one interesting way of thinking about this, by the way, is a thought experiment. If you're in New York and you're looking at all the buildings, right? In a sense, the US passport actually only gets you access to the surface streets, and the shops are in the surface streets. Because to gain access to one of those windows that you're looking at, you need to have a key card to that hotel in that specific room, or you need to have a lease on the office in that specific building. So actually, if you had augmented reality glasses, most of New York, probably by percentage, maybe 80%, 90%, is red. unless you've paid for a second private passport,
Yeah.
meaning the key card to that hotel room, right? On top of the first public passport, which is the public space, right? Once you kind of think of that, you're like, actually, wow, most of a city is actually digitally gated private space, and only a small subset of it is publicly accessible space with your kind of public passport, right?
Yeah.
Once you think about that, you're like, okay, well, digitally gated private space, that is a lot of what's online. And so that also means just like much of an economy can be with cryptocurrency, much of a society can be with a crypto passport. This is the kind of thing I think a lot about.
Yeah, I love that.
Cool.
I love that. This is awesome.
Great.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it was great.
Absolutely.